Welcome, everyone, to the Friday morning, Thursday night football wrap-up edition of Unexpected Points. I am your humble host and narrator, Kevin Cole, data scientist at PFF. It's a good and bad week for nerds. I discussed some of this on the Monday morning Week 5 wrap-up edition, plus the Tuesday morning Monday Night Football review edition of how the analytics talk is all over the place. Highlighted some online social media discourse on this. But what I didn't really fully appreciate is how much the talk took over the take sphere going on the old media here, better known as television. I don't know about you guys. I don't watch a lot of sports media take Smith television. It seems like that's basically what ESPN is outside of broadcasting games, because you have 17 different variations of two dudes and sometimes a woman giving takes on what happened here. I mean, I guess there are shows like NFL Live and others, and Mina's on there, and she's great, and she gets into some of the other stuff. But still, it's a lot of takes. It's a lot of takes, even on that show. There's only so much you can get through. Because of that sort of lack of information, again, it's like the whole Twitter thing that I say. You're either informing or you're performing. A lot of performance going on versus informing on these take shows. I'm not one for the performance, but I didn't realize how it was taking over everything, because I saw this week Ben Solak over at The Ringer had a little video talking about analytics. He's getting into it on the positive side, of course. ESPN Daily on Friday, Bill Barnwell's on there leading numbers based. I don't know if he's not really like a super nerd commentator, but he's definitely the leading media guy, I would say. That's very friendly. Background at Football Outsiders. He uses a lot of numbers there. He was on talking to Pablo Torre on ESPN Daily about analytics and everything. So we're having a moment. And guess what? Football guys don't like it. That's what it comes down to. But if you want to hear more about my whole analytics spiel, you can go back to the Monday show. We have that time stamped if you want to get on there and get exactly to my dissecting what's going on there. I mean, it basically just comes down to, it's just evidence, right? It's just information we're looking at here. And there's no extra downside to losing if you go for it than losing if you don't go for it, which I think is the part that people maybe don't quite understand because of the immediacy and the clarity of results when you go for it and fail versus the delay and the more opaque nature of the loss if you don't go for it in these circumstances. Okay, but I'm not going to do the whole analytics talk again. We're going to wade through the muck and the mire of Thursday night football, Bears Commanders. We're going to do that first. I'm going to talk about some storylines from the week, some interesting stuff that, it goes outside of even football related sometimes. Maybe I'll get into my not quite stick to sports sort of territory, but a little bit of that in this one. And then we'll talk about a weekend slate of games. And we got probably, let's just say it, the best game of the season. Number 1 and number 2 and what should be teams in most people's power rankings, outside of the people that feel like they need to rank the Eagles 1 or 2 because they're undefeated. When we have Bills favored at the Chiefs. We'll talk about whether that's justified or not as part of this wrap up. All right, but let's get into, first and foremost, let's get into what we saw last night. A game of inches came through at the very end of this, where the Bears lose 12-7 to the Washington Commanders.
So if he holds on to it there, he's across the goal line. He's in. But he doesn't. He gets control outside of the goal line. You can't be any closer than that.
Yes, right at the end of the game, Darnell Mooney bobbles in midair in his attempt to catch, brings it in. I think they give him credit for the catch, although I wasn't sure at first whether or not his elbow was out of bounds, whether he even deserved credit or not. But of course, it was on a 4th down, which ended up being a turnover on downs. The 3rd time in the game that the Bears had a turnover on downs in this game, including a 4th and 1 from the 1-yard line, which they did not convert. And it leads to this Commanders victory. Okay, there's not a lot to say about the game itself, I don't think. The Commanders were 1.5-point favorites against the Bears. The total was 38, which I'm going to have to redefine all my models. I'm going to talk about this a little bit when it comes to adjusted scores too, because the lack of scoring is just crazy. You could figure 2 starting quarterbacks, right? These guys are the starters. Whatever you want to say about Fields and Wentz, they are the starters. This is not a situation where you had a 3rd string quarterback in the game or something like that. 2 defenses, which they're okay, right? They're okay. I don't think they're fantastic, though, either one of these defenses. The Washington defense, Commanders have been applying a decent amount of pressure to some of their opponents, but far away from saying these are great defenses. And we get a 38 total. There wasn't, a little bit windy for this game, but not dramatic weather concerns. This is not the Bills-Patriots game from last year where they were playing in just absurd circumstances, where I'm not even sure what the total was on that game. Obviously, it was way too high because they didn't do anything in that game, but I'm not sure if it was that much different than this 38 total that we saw in this game, yet comfortably under here with a total of 19 points scored in this game. So only half of that 38 total was scored in this game. Just crazy. Absolutely crazy. And maybe I'll just talk right up front, because I'll just say the adjusted score here I have, 23-16 Chicago, is a bit higher than I was expecting going on to it. And an adjustment that I think I might need to make to the adjusted scores, I know we're getting a little bit meta here because now we're talking about the adjusted scores, right? But I have been looking more carefully at success rate versus efficiency this season. And the first few weeks of the season, it was definitely different than what we had traditionally seen. So in other words, I'm building a lot of these models and I'm saying we're going to downweight these outlier type of plays. And by doing that, we're going to focus more on success rate. So we're going to model what we'd expect the efficiency to be, the actual efficiency to be, based on the actual success rate. So we're going to model that. So we'll have an expected number for that, and then we'll combine it with the actual number for their efficiency in expected points added per play. And then that's going to be our mixed number rather than just looking at the actual efficiency. The problem that seems to reaching the point of sustainability at this point is that if you just plot out and you say success rate on the x-axis, efficiency on the y-axis, so how actually efficient you are offensively, the whole line, if you just draw a little, regression line on there, the whole line, while it's still sloping up, of course, like it will be, the more successful you are on a play-by-play basis, the more likely you are to have big efficiency overall. But it's just lower across the board. Your efficiency at a particular success rate is lower than what you'd expect. Let's say if you have a 50th percentile success rate now, what you're scoring is below what you'd expect based upon in the past, what that 50th percentile success rate. Teams are being close to as successful as they've been in the past on a play-by-play basis. In other words, generating positive EPA on a play-by-play basis, but they're just not getting the big plays, which is lowering their overall efficiency. And they are getting big negative plays, whether it's turnovers, strip sacks, things like that. Those are still occurring, which is messing with the model a little bit because, of course, it's trained on previous seasons. It's trained on stuff that happened before this season. And I think because of that, I'm getting somewhat inflated across the board adjusted scores, which is playing into some of my models for looking at betting at over-unders. So I think I'm going to have to fix this whole thing, maybe build in some assumptions where I'm downweighting it with this, thinking that this is going to continue this season, because I don't know. I mean, it looks at certain teams, like let's take the Bengals, for instance, who played against the Ravens on Sunday night. It looks at those teams, looks at teams like the Bengals, and it says, oh, their offense isn't that bad because they're being successful on a play-by-play basis, but they're just completely absent of these big plays that they had in prior years. I thought that'll eventually regress back. Maybe it will to a degree, but it's not coming through in the numbers so far. So we're going to have to make some adjustments there. So I say it's 23-16 Chicago. I think we can say Chicago was the better team in this game because of the fact they had all these missed opportunities. Muffed punt cost them 6 expected points, fumble on the muff punt. 4th and 1 failure at the goal line cost them about 4 expected points. Obviously, this play right at the end, 4th and not being able to convert right on the goal line cost them a handful of expected points. All that stuff happened. So they probably were the better team. They were the more successful team offensively. They had about a 40% success rate, 40th percentile success rate to about a 20th percentile for the Commanders. They averaged 5.7 yards per play as opposed to 4 for the Commanders. So I do think they were the better team, but these numbers, 23-16, might be a bit inflated. It might be more like a, 18-13 type of adjusted score would be more appropriate in this game. All right, I'm not going to go through everything that happened in the box score, that sort of stuff. I'll get to Fields in a second because I think we need to have a big Justin Fields talk. This is probably a big thing that we're going to have here. Everyone saw him in his first primetime game this season, so I wouldn't be surprised there's a lot more negativity on him, despite the fact that he was definitely struggling those first few weeks of the season before playing a little bit better against the Vikings last week. But let's talk about some of the decisions here. I think all the 4th down decisions were correct, although one of them was a little bit iffy. And maybe this goes into the Fields talk also. The Bears had the ball 4th and 11, and they were at the 43-yard line. The Commanders' 43-yard line, 2 minutes and 34 seconds left, down by 5. So in this sort of circumstance, it makes sense that rather than attempting, you're not going to attempt like a 60-yard field goal, right? At 4th and 11, you go ahead and you go for it in this circumstance. The numbers do point to doing that. The problem is they took a delay of game, and this is just really a bad one. And it kind of plays into some of the things with Fields that you just can't do that. I mean, they were there. They were ready. They had plenty of time. He was barking out whatever sort of pre-snap, instructions to people. He does a fake hut sort of situation. And then he says, let's hurry up and let's snap it. And it's just a little bit too late. It's one of those ones where sometimes they let it go because by the time that the whole way that works is that the field judge is looking down to see when it snapped, and then they look up. And if there's 0 on the clock when they look up, then they call it. So sometimes that isn't happening. But this decision here, 4th and 16, I don't know. I mean, it went slightly like negative towards maybe you shouldn't go for it. Maybe you should punt in this situation, try to pin them back and then get the ball back rather than try to convert a 4th and 16 because, it depends on your offense, of course, but I get it that you need the points there. I mean, they end up getting the ball back anyway, right? I get it that you need the points there, but your success rate in a 4th and 16 with this offense is probably like 10%, if not less than 10%. So it's a rough one. It's a rough one in that circumstance as to what you should do or not, but you could have punted there. I think the bigger thing was just how do you miss and how do you take a delay of game in that circumstance? That part of it was really, really bad. Okay, let's get into Justin Fields talk because he was doing a lot of work for sacks or a quarterback stat people like myself. He was doing a ton of work there because if you look at, what was happening on this, especially on the first sack of the game that he ended up taking, he was holding, clutching, moving around, and then eventually taking the sack. I mean, this is a play where it was, and I'm going to look at some of his numbers on the different sacks that he took in this game. He took 5 sacks in this game. So that is, it's a lot for only 42 dropbacks. Not the worst number ever, but over 10%, which has been over. He's the worst on the season doing this sort of stuff. And when you look at these different plays, this play that started the game that everyone saw, and then the other sacks that eventually came, the time to pressure on this play was 3.8 seconds. So he wasn't even facing pressure until 3.8 seconds. Just remember, most quarterbacks have a time to throw, so the ball is out of their hands, even including big plays like scrambles and other things and sacks they're taking. Most quarterbacks are better than 3 or lower than 3 seconds. The ball's out of their hand on average. Fields, his first 3 sacks that he took, wasn't even pressured until 3.8 seconds, 3.5 seconds, and 3.3 seconds. So he wouldn't even face a pressure. A normal quarterback is probably not even facing a pressure on those plays. And if you look at when he was sacked, the actual time to sack, 5.9 seconds on that first one. So almost 6 seconds he had the ball in his hand before he couldn't throw away. He couldn't find a receiver. He couldn't escape and scramble by that point. 5.9 seconds. The second one, 4.4, so not quite as bad, but then 7.8 seconds on the third one. That's just way too much time. There's just no reason you should be holding it for that long and then eventually taking a sack. You have to have something in mind to do by the end of that. Now, his final 2 sacks, he was pressured in 2.2 seconds, which is pretty fast, but not under 2 seconds. You know, it wasn't like Carson Wentz's first sack where he was pressured immediately. And even one of those two, 4.6 seconds, he held the ball on that one before taking the sack. You can't do that. Plus, we're talking about 10 scrambles in this game. I mean, I'm pro scrambling for quarterbacks, but you don't want to overuse it. And what I was looking at for Fields, this is a number that I looked at for him coming out of college, which concerned me a little bit. It's going to be very concerning what he's doing in the pros. I pointed to it for Malik Willis a little bit as being potential issue for him. If he ever gets and starts for the NFL, we're going to have to look at it closely, is just adding up the sacks and scrambles and getting an idea of how often when someone is dropping back to pass, they're not passing the ball. Scrambling is good in certain circumstances, again, but if you're not passing the ball 10% of the time, that's fine. If you're not passing the ball 20% of the time, it's not great. If you're not passing the ball 30% of the time, that's really not great. Okay, Fields did not pass the ball 35% of the time. Then he went back. Basically, one of every 3 times he dropped back to pass. Remember, that's the intention. That's what you're trying to do. That's the highest efficiency play on that game, is to pass down the field 35% of the time, not passing the ball last night. 15 total sacks and scrambles in this game. That's something that's been going on all season long, and it needs to be cleaned up. I don't have the solution here, but we do get further and further to the point of, will it ever be cleaned up now that we're going into a second NFL season? It's a trait we're now seeing for year after year after year after year. And overall this season, subject to finalizing the grades for this particular game, which has not been done yet, so this could change slightly. So far this season, Fields is dead last in PFF passing grade, 46.3. There are 32 different quarterbacks who have 100 dropbacks so far this season. Fields is last. And I went to look historically, that 46.3 number, which will probably get better. I mean, the smaller the sample, the more potential you have for outlier type of numbers. I can't remember who it was the other day. It may have been Warren Sharp, or someone was sharing a stat where they said, through week 3, I forget who it was. Maybe it was the Ravens, how well that they were producing against the blitz and how it was better than any team had ever done before in history. And it's like, yeah, through week 3, you're going to have better than ever and worse than ever more often because it's a smaller sample size. So you have more noise in there. If you could, and you're not likely to sustain it over the course of a season. So never compare 3-week samples to full season samples if you're trying to point to the best or the worst of something. Although I am comparing it here. I am comparing the worst here, but I'm caveating it, and I'm telling everyone this is not, he'll get better. But just to get an idea of the type of seasons we're talking about here, a grade, in the 46 sort of range. I looked at grades that were between, less than 50 over the course of a whole season. These are guys who played at least 400 plays, so they made it through a whole season. And there aren't a lot, even since 2006, as we've been looking at this. I mean, the worst, Blaine Gabbert, 2011 for Jacksonville. He was the worst. He was around 40 for his grade. J.P. Lossman, 2006 for the Buffalo Bills. Matt Stafford, low-key, awful as a rookie, 2009. Sanchez in 2012. Rex Grossman in 2006. Blake Bortles, 2014. PFFer Bruce Gradkowski, shout out to Bruce, in 2006. Josh Rosen for the Cardinals in that rookie season, 2018. Alex Smith was really, really, really bad early in his career, 2006. And then Tim Tebow, the Tebonator, 2011. So this is the type of company that we're talking about here for Fields. Again, I'll probably get a little bit better, but you don't see successful careers here other than Alex Smith. And even Alex Smith, kind of a low upside career for the rest of it, for the rest of what he ended up doing there. I guess Stafford. No, I mentioned Stafford's on there. But again, that was his rookie season where he was, the 0-16 sort of franchise we're talking about there. And if we look career-wise, again, for Fields, I do this thing where I'm looking at their grading and their efficiency adjusted for sample. So I'm looking at a play-by-play basis. I do this thing called Bayesian updating. I don't need to get into the specifics of it, but basically it allows us to project a range of outcomes for players and their expectations. So the expectation for Fields, now his range of outcomes is a little bit higher than more veteran comebacks, but the expectation for Fields is now the second worst expectation for basically any starting quarterback in the NFL. Davis Mills is slightly worse than Fields right now. The rest of the 2021 class is, not exactly covering themselves in glory either. Lawrence is about 24th in his ranking, Wilson 23rd, Mac Jones 16th, so he's a bit higher because he had a good rookie season, but things are looking rough for Fields. And we can point to the circumstances being bad, although I think his blocking has been a little bit better than some people might think. The circumstances being bad, the receivers being bad, although, Darnell Mooney's okay. Dante Pettis made a great touchdown catch last night. But it's getting more and more like, if you're the Bears, if it gets worse, I know you had won some games already, but now at 2-4, if you have one of those top picks in the draft, I think you got to think about, at least think very, very hard. And probably if I'm the decision maker, pulling the trigger on another quarterback in this upcoming draft, if these things continue for Fields the way that they are continuing. All right, let's talk the Commanders. And probably the larger story isn't even this game coming out of what we saw yesterday. The pressure is being applied heavily on Daniel Snyder coming out of this game. And what we saw was an article from ESPN is the big pressure point here. This was, sorry, I'm bringing this up for the YouTubers, but I'm going to focus in a little bit more here. So the most explosive claim is highlighted in this one, which is that Daniel Snyder is going around and telling other people within the organization or people that he's talking to that he has quote unquote dirt on NFL owners and Roger Goodell, that through his legal firm that he is hiring people to go ahead and private investigators kind of spy on people so that they cannot remove him. Now, they need 2/3 of owners. So they need 24 owners to vote out Snyder. The vote will never happen unless they know the votes are there. They're not going to, they're going to count and they're going to know in advance whether or not the votes are going to be there. But this is seen as being Snyder's way of protecting himself as part of this story. Now, of course, Snyder came back with a statement saying that it's all very, false reporting, things like that. I think we do have to look maybe a little bit at some of the claims, grain of salt, you could say, for some of this stuff. You know that I'm big on incentives. So I think, first of all, you would look at the reputations of the reporters here. This was written with 3 different ESPN reporters: Seth Wickersham, Don Van Netta, and Tisha Thompson. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. Don Van Netta, former national security reporter for the New York Times, big time guy there. Seth Wickersham has written some big articles in the past. So definitely credible reporters here. At the same time, from an incentive standpoint, like, no one has any incentive to be fair to Daniel Snyder. I mean, what's your incentive to be fair to Daniel Snyder right now? There's none. Basically, there's none, right? So when you're talking about fairness in reporting, accuracy and fairness in reporting, the incentive there is reputational, right? It isn't that you have incentives to make things very provocative, controversial. You want more people to see what you're doing, right? So that's one incentive. And then the counterweight to the incentive to keep people in line for not just, losing kind of journalistic ethics and standards is that the institutional reputation of someone like ESPN, and then the individual reputation of the reporters for fairness. There's not much risk, not much incentive in that direction when we're talking about reporting on Daniel Snyder right now. And I think also as a larger point, like social media has really shifted those incentives where people are very incentivized to please their crowd and this kind of this audience capture type of thing where you're more and more concerned about, the right people thinking the right thing about you on social media, which can really warp, fairness in a lot of these different discussions. But as far as the claims that were made here, I think from a football perspective, the one that jumped out the most to me, and this is something that was addressed after the game, is that there's talk of poor Carson Wentz. Okay, maybe I shouldn't say poor Carson Wentz because, whatever. He's an NFL quarterback. He's making $20 to 20-something million. You can critique what he does on the field. It's fair, I think, to critique what he does on the field. But you have to say, at a certain point, though, like the guy is just catching bullets left and right all over the place. And one of the bullets that he's catching here is that it was said as part of this article that Snyder felt like he could get, if he got like the quarterback that he wanted, and this is what the part of the article is talking about here. If he got the quarterback or a new stadium as part of this, it could be the silver bullets, and all my problems will be solved if I can just get a marquee quarterback as part of this. And then, they traded the second, third, and conditional third-round picks for Carson Wentz, who at one point in time, was an MVP candidate in 2017, all that sort of stuff. They mentioned Snyder's penchant for overpaying and negotiating against himself. I mean, I guess there's, I don't know if I'll disagree necessarily with that. But this is the part here. It says sources familiar with the deal say that it was Snyder who pushed for Wentz, and Commanders football staffers have told people around the league as much. The quote here is, "It was 100% a Dan move," says a source with knowledge of the inner workings of the deal. But in the team's statement to ESPN, Rivera insisted that he had brought the idea of acquiring Wentz to Dan and Tanya, so Dan and his wife, who supported it. They love this game and this team. And then kind of an egregious shot at Wentz here where it says, hearing that Snyder hopes a marquee quarterback will chase away all his problems, an owner laughed. Carson Wentz, why poor guy, man. Why are we taking shots at Carson? And then the picture, of course, of Wentz on here getting slammed by a bunch of people here. Man, I kind of feel sorry for Carson Wentz in some of this because he ends up becoming the story on this. And then to say that Rivera was not too pleased about the whole situation would be a vast understatement, because after the game, he was asked about these reports, again, which he disputes, that this was Dan Snyder who wanted Carson Wentz and everything else. And this is what Rivera said to the reporters.
They've played their asses off. They played their asses off for everybody. They come out and they show up. They work hard. All right. They don't complain. Okay. They hear all this stuff and they got to deal with it. I get that. I respect them for it because they're resilient. They come out. Everybody keeps wanting to say, I didn't want anything to do with Carson. Well, bullshit. I'm the fucking guy that pulled out the sheets of paper, that looked at the analytics, that watched the tape in the freaking, when we were in Indianapolis. Okay? And that's what pisses me off. Because the young man doesn't deserve to have that all the time. I'm sorry, I'm done.
Yeah, and then Rivera just peace out after that for the rest of the press conference. So as you heard there, he's pissed. I like it. I like him standing up for Carson Wentz here. I kind of agree with him a little bit here. I mean, maybe it's just my contrarian nature generally, and maybe just my whole just being allergic to bullying, that I feel like Carson Wentz, despite all the downside, like this guy is always just catching strays. And, they mention in here, like, do you think Rivera's really lying about this, that he did not want him or something? I don't think so. I just don't see it. I do not believe it. Maybe I'm a little bit too naive when it comes to things like that, but I kind of think Ron Rivera's a good guy. So it hurts a little bit to see this sort of stuff, because I do think this is the downside of the incentive structure, which is dunk on Carson Wentz, dunk on Snyder, dunk on everyone here. There is like collateral damage, you could say, when it comes to Rivera, when it comes to Wentz, when it comes to others here who are maybe not part of the larger story, which of course, Dan Snyder is not someone who needs to be defended at all. But to see everyone else go down with them, and I guess, you lie with dogs, you get fleas sort of situation. But to see everyone else go down with them is just a little bit disappointing, at least in my eyes. All right, before I get on to some other stories of the week and then my best bets for this weekend, let's talk DraftKings. DraftKings, NFL action is in full swing here. DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. We're talking touchdowns, big plays, and even bigger wins. New customers can bet just $5 on any NFL team to win and get $200 in free bets if they do. If that's not enough, everyone can boost their winnings with DraftKings stepped-up same-game parlays. Right now, for every leg you add, you can boost your winnings up to 100%. With bigger payouts than ever, why bet on football anywhere else? To make things even sweeter, you can throw down on stepped-up same-game parlays once per game day all season long. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now. Use promo code PFF to get $200 in free bets if your team wins when you place a $5 bet on any football game. That's code PFF, only at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NFL. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for details. Also, the Unexpected Points podcast is brought to you by Western and Southern Financial Group. When you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right. Great weekend of games coming up here. Well, at least we have KC Buffalo. So let's talk KC Buffalo right off the top. Right now, Buffalo's a 2.5-point favorite in this game, and it's in Kansas City. So that's really the interesting part, right? Is that I believe this is the first time ever Patrick Mahomes has been an underdog at home in a game. And if we look at the opening line here, it's up to 3. Holy crap. There are 3s out there. Okay, now we're getting a warning signal. Now, although the 3 is taking Kansas City plus the points, it looks like it's minus 120 though. So you have to give up a little bit of extra juice. Might be worth it. But this opened at 1.5. So if anything, people are into it. I mean, I do think the way the Bills have played this year, they're like head and shoulders and torso above the rest of the NFL. It makes sense, I think, that they would be favored. But if we're talking about 3, and if it continues to move in that direction, minus 120 makes it like a maybe play for me. It was definitely not a play at 2.5, but that 3 points is pretty huge. We'll see if that continues, if there's any continuing movement in that direction to keep it there. But as far as how these teams have played so far this year, I mean, the Bills have been way better than the Chiefs have been so far this year. Now, they're actually getting these explosive plays that we've talked about. A lot of other teams have not been getting so far this year. They're actually getting some help on the ground. Not a lot, though. The ground game has not been good versus Kansas City, but they're getting more help also from their defense. And I plot out adjusted scores, like average adjusted scores for and against, looking at opponents on here. And if you look at what the Bills have been doing, and then you think about tiering in a way where you're giving maybe twice the credit to offense versus defense. I mean, the Bills are kind of in a tier of their own as far as how they played so far this year. You have the Eagles and, believe it or not, the Browns, which are pretty close, but substantially, I mean, materially further away, but they're kind of a little bit closer there. And then you go into the next broader tier with the Jaguars, the Chiefs, and the Bengals as far as how they've played so far this season. Now, you also have to think about how well you think the teams were going into the season and their schedule. Browns and Eagles have had a very easy schedule, so that would bring them down. That would move Kansas City up above them as far as how they've actually played this year. And the Bills have had a pretty tough schedule, actually. even though they performed as well as they do. So that would give them even an additional bump here. I think it's fair to say the Bills are the best team in the NFL. I think it's fair to say they are a couple of points better than the Kansas City Chiefs right now. But according to my power rankings, it's more like 1.5 better. Whereas these numbers here imply they're, 3, 4, 5 points better is what the line implies here. So I would take Kansas City here if you can get it at 3, hopefully minus 110, not minus 120. But it's not, a total gimme slam dunk sort of situation. The other teams that my numbers like for this week, and I don't know. A lot of these, my numbers are going to like the teams where you're kind of plugging your nose and just, pushing the button here without having to like what you're seeing here. The other one is the Giants at home against the Baltimore Ravens. My numbers just don't like the Ravens as much this season, relying upon those explosive plays. Although, I had Cincinnati, which ended up hitting last week, but it was close. There were some big plays that the Ravens left on the table. And the defense has been bottom 10 for the Ravens so far in giving up success. They've been a bend but don't break when it came to the game against the Bengals. So that's part of it. Maybe my numbers are underrating the Ravens defense a bit. And the Giants finally had a good game last week. It could be more about the Green Bay. Good game from Daniel Jones dropping back to pass, I should say, not running the ball. If he gets a little bit healthier, they continue to run it here. And their defense has played a lot better than what I thought they were going to do this season. And we also have narrative. We got some great narratives going to this one with Wink Martindale, the former defensive coordinator for a number of years, basically got fired from the Ravens. And now he's with the Giants. He's going to blitz a lot. Lamar had problems against the blitz last year. He's been better, a lot better early in the season this year. So there's going to be some big play potential out there. I don't think Rashad Bateman's going to go again, which is a concern, although Devin Duvernay is probably a little bit better than some people think as far as filling in to that type of role. The line is 5.5, even though it's in New York. My line would be more like 3 as opposed to 5.5. So you're getting a little bit here on the Giants, and that's the way that I would lean on this. But again, I don't have like a lot of faith in the Giants. They could get completely wiped out, but the numbers lean towards them slightly. Another play I like, and this is another team that, again, my adjusted scores just love the Browns and how they've played so far this season, is they're at home, 2.5-point favorites against the Patriots. And for the Patriots, massive downgrade in quarterback play here. I would have them being more like 4 or 5-point favorites in this one, clearly over the 3, though. So that one's a little bit shocking to me. I know I might be getting a little bit fooled, though, here by the Browns of saying, I keep on continually thinking that the defense is going to play a little bit better or play more in line with their success rate versus how they've been playing and giving up third downs, giving up big plays there. Yet, I don't know. It's just weird because this is a one that opened up as potentially you were going to see the Patriots be favored in a game like this. Now they're underdogs, quarterback situation. I just think it needs to be a little bit more. Bailey Zappe's been fine as a quarterback. But the concern with him is that he dropped back a total of 40 times over the last 2 games. It's been impressive that he hasn't fallen apart, but there was absolutely no pressure on him last week from a scoring perspective or from a defensive perspective in that Lions game. And he looked pretty good. He looked okay against the Packers, right? But I think the Browns are probably going to sell out to stop the run in this one. They've had such trouble. Worst team in the NFL so far this season, stopping the run. Austin Eckler ran all over them last week. That they're going to force Zappe to do something. And Zappe is a little bit weak when it comes to arm strength. He's had some turnover-worthy plays that didn't end up being turnovers already this season. I'm just not convinced on the 40 dropbacks we've seen from him over 2 games that if he has to throw it a little bit higher volume, that he's going to be able to maintain it. So the Browns laying 2.5, I'll lean on that one. And then the last one that I like here, and this one, this is ugly. This is ugly because it could be a complete wipeout, is the Steelers 8.5-point underdogs at home. It's such a huge number. And I guess, I mean, the Steelers are bad, right? I get it. They got completely shellacked by the Bills. I mean, I understand. I mean, freaking Green Bay is only 7.5-point favorites at home against the Jets. Okay. The Jets are playing a lot better than the Steelers. Don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying for comparison, they're 7.5-point favorites at home against the Jets. The Bucs are 8.5-point favorites at the Steelers. I know the Bucs have gotten healthy. I think they're probably the third best team in the NFL, so I'll give you that. At the same time, this is just too high to get way over 7 like this with Pickett playing okay. You know, he doesn't have the explosive plays. There's no doubt about that on offense, but he's playing okay offensively. They just need to lean a little bit more into him throwing the ball. And defensively, they stopped the Bills a few times in that first half. They just gave up, you know, a 3rd and 10, 98-yard touchdown. Hey, what are you going to do on that sort of play? There were just some big plays that were made there. But they were successful actually stopping them. They just can't give up those huge plays, which could happen, of course, against the Bucs, but hopefully we'll regress back a little bit. So the Steelers, again, these are not teams you're going to love. You're not going to love the Giants, the Browns, and the Steelers, but I think these are ones that the market is a little bit low, a little bit too low on those teams vis-a-vis where my numbers would have them right now and where I had them coming into the season. All right, that's it for me, guys. Enjoy the rest of this weekend. I'll be back Monday morning with a review of all the different games. Hope you're enjoying the little video clips that I'm tossing in there, although I don't think the NFL is happy about it. Probably getting demonetized here on YouTube. But I'll be back at you with all that information on Monday morning, and then, of course, Tuesday again, and then the Thursday night wrap up on next Friday morning. Rate, review the pod, thumbs up, all that stuff if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Otherwise, I'll be talking at all of you next week. Have a great weekend.